Yes, I'm Ross Yasikov. I'm a senior product manager at Pandora. I worked before, among others, at Cisco for 3 years, managing some of their hardware products. And I had a lot of questions when I wanted to move from hardware to software around the differences between the industries. And so I thought that this talk might be interesting for you guys too. All right, so the first thing that immediately stands out is the difference, the striking difference, right, between the hardware PM and the hardware PM is all about the circuit boards, and the software is all about those fluff and flowers. Really, I have like 30 slides here, and it all boils down basically to this. So, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about what is a good PM. Is a good PM should a good PM be product agnostic? Right? Does it even matter if you're managing a software product or a hardware product? We'll talk a little bit about the actual differences between managing those two types of products, and we'll connect the dots with talking about what's the ideal kind of blend of personality and skills for the job, and how to excel in whatever job you get. You know what, even before we dive into that, how many people here work for a software company? Not necessarily as a software product manager, but software company. Cool. And hardware? All right, a healthy split. As usual, software is kind of the dominating part, and hardware is slightly kind of mysterious. So I hope this would be really useful for people to learn more about the hardware domain. Okay, so should a good product manager be product agnostic? I actually skimmed a bunch of LinkedIn jobs on LinkedIn to see both hardware and software postings, and I found two interesting things. First, they didn't differ too much, right? The requirements for hardware and for software product managers' roles didn't differ too much. And on the other hand, those requirements didn't feel very relevant for me. They felt absolutely meaningless. So many of them, almost most of them, talked about technical acumen, right? Basically, software or computer science background, or like engineering background or experience with coding. I would claim that engineering background is probably the worst background for a product manager to have, right? From my own experience, it always, especially initially, pushed me to talk, when I was thinking about a product or about a feature, I was thinking more about what's the easiest way to do it, right, rather than what the user actually needs. Or I would engage in a bunch of conversations around what's the best way to do it, like how to do it, instead of talking about what to do and why to do it. Another thing that I noticed, experience with Agile development. I think that Agile is a very is a buzz term nowadays, and basically it means planning more or less every other week for the next 2 weeks. Who here have ever planned, put a task or scheduled an event on his calendar for this week or for the next one? All right, so you're a certified Scrum manager, and this is that simple. That's what you do. You basically schedule a meeting every other week, and you plan for the next 2 weeks. Data-driven mindset, another irrelevant requirement. Everything is data-driven. All of your decisions would be data-driven, even if those decisions based on emotions. Emotions is also some kind of data that you make your decision based on. Totally irrelevant. A/B testing experience. All right, so that is not something that we do every day, but I would claim it's also pretty relevant, because basically what it means, you take a green button, you take a blue button, you compare the number of clicks between the two, and yeah, the green button gets more clicks, you go with that. That's about it. It's a little bit more complicated. There is a bunch of trade-offs involved usually, right? So the green button might get more clicks, but the blue button, for some weird reason, might get longer sessions, right? And by the way, the green button clicks would come from 20 to 30 years old people in Minnesota. Okay, so, but that kind of drilling down and segmenting, you would be doing it so much in your job that it basically is irrelevant whether or not you did a few times, you did that a few times before, right? 1 week into your job, you'll be doing it like a master. Planning and story prioritization, something that also comes up almost in all those job postings. Have you guys ever planned anything or prioritized anything? Great, you're planner masters. So I would claim this is all relevant. So what is relevant for a good PM? Creativity and open mind. You need to be creative to come up with new ideas for new products, for new features of your product. And you have to have an open mind because tons of ideas would come to you from different stakeholders, from QA people, from engineering, from marketing, from sales, from your girlfriend, from your kids. You will need to absorb those, see the value in the idea, shape the idea, right? Those ideas would often come in a raw format, very unshaped. You will need to identify, structurize them, and fight for them. You know, see the value and convince other people in that value. So that's why the ability to influence others, you'll need to be selling your product and your ideas, your features to all those stakeholders, starting from your boss to the engineering boss to marketing. You will be trying to convince others all the time. And finally, when you got the approvals from all those stakeholders, you need to actually execute. Okay, so drive and bias for action is very necessary. It sounds a little bit trivial. Well, you know, after you put your product in development, basically it should be hands-off. That is not the case usually, because the people who would work on that product, on that feature, can also work or would also work on other products and features, and you would need to constantly maintain relationships with those people, constantly motivate those people, and navigate the internal politics to push your product forward. Now, all of those still seem kind of universal for hardware and software. So what's the catch? I say it's not just the skills, right? It's going back to that diagram of the brains. It's a lot of it is excitement. It's how much you can excite yourself by reading articles about your product. That excitement translates in motivation that gets you to actually educate yourself. Wake up in the morning, scroll your news feed, and find the articles that talk about your industry, that talk about your product, that talk about the competitors of your product. So if you can read through an article about a particular product, it's probably a better fit than if you can't. So that ability to educate yourself would drive performance. And the ability, the fact that you ship something that you actually perform would kind of reignite this circle of life. It would excite you, motivate you, and so on. And we'll get back to that a little later. All right, so let's dive into the differences between the actual hardware and software work. Before that, a little bit of definitions. So software, I think most people are kind of familiar. Everybody uses emails, plays games, have social networks, and so on. Hardware is kind of more out of the radar. So I put here a little diagram of our realistic material world. So we have some residential areas with some houses. We have some factories, maybe power plants, some businesses, some administrative areas like schools and hospitals, and we have the infrastructure that connects all of them. So breaking that down, we have components, right? Everything consists of components like CPUs, chips, DSP, circuit boards, motherboards, screens, and LCDs. Then we have the actual end products. And so I would be talking more about B2B, but the same concepts basically apply to B2C. Cisco is mainly B2B, but it doesn't really matter. So what kind of product, the end products can we talk about? Consumer electronics, right? Laptops, phones, factory robots, manufacturing robots, medical devices, that kind of stuff. And finally, things that connect all of it. Infrastructure, routers, switches, security devices, telephony, storage, right? That is kind of filling the void and connects everything. Okay, so what are the actual differences? So one very striking difference is the length of the life cycle of a product. Hardware products, 3 to 5 years life cycle, meaning there is a good few years between this and that box. They change very slowly, rather than software that would be changing basically every week, every other week, or in some companies with continuous deployment, they do it every day. So basically they release features every day. Things move much faster. What does it mean from the responsibilities standpoint, from a PM responsibilities? Most of your work in hardware would, unlike software, not focused around coming up with new features, but rather five main things. Documenting your stuff, blueprints, white prints, internal wikis, marketing documents. And marketing is also, identifying the right marketing channels, the right targeting audience, PR materials. Manufacturing. Manufacturing is a huge part of it. You will need to work with lots of vendors, right? There is a bunch of components involved, like memory chips and all that. You'll need to maintain the relationships with all those vendors. Purchase, bookings for the stuff. It's especially with B2B environment, when those companies, for example, Cisco, almost never works directly with consumers. They work through third-party sellers. So you would need to maintain relationships with those, manage those, to make sure that the pricing and the description of the product is correctly updated in their catalogs. Lots of work around that. Installation, maintenance, and usage. You will have a lot of training sessions. You would train people, you will train sellers, you would train experts, technical experts. Granted, in the beginning, technical experts would be training you, but at some point you will take the lead. You will be training the actual customers. Lots and lots of outbound work. A/B testing. There is no A/B testing for hardware. Almost no A/B testing. There is obviously some research done in the beginning of a life cycle, but that's basically comparing one box versus the other. It's nothing compared to what's going on in the software world, where every pixel is being A/B tested, right? Literally in every one of my software-related PRDs, the first line is, this is going to be an A/B test. Heavy vendor management. As I mentioned before, there is a lot of outbound work involved with hardware, not so much with software. Not to say that in software you won't be talking to outside vendors and third parties. Some positions involve even more of that, but on average, hardware by definition, because it has those many components, would just involve much more outbound work. Financial responsibilities. That's a pretty cool feature of a hardware PM role. You'll be working a lot with finance, building financial models to forecast the demand for your product, to forecast the manufacturing facilities. You will be working a lot with manufacturing managers, with operations managers, with supply chain managers. So building those models is pretty cool. With software, not so much finance. You'll be doing a lot of hand waving and estimations, but you could say this feature would bring us $5 million a year, might as well bring $20 a year. Nobody would ever know. All right, so let's dive into a specific example. When I came to Cisco, at some point I was assigned to manage a telephony gateway that was responsible for connecting touch tone phones, so basically legacy phones, not the fancy voice over IP phones. So it was supposed to kind of go away at some point in the not so distant future, but it still brought kind of a healthy revenue for Cisco. I started to dive a little bit into the sales reports of the product, and suddenly I realized that while the revenues kind of maintained the same over the years, the costs went up significantly. And so the profitability of the product went down in the last couple of years. Drilling down more, in talking to the sellers, I realized that there was a big change in the hospitality industry in China. So apparently there was a law that required hotels to have a telephone in every hotel room, which basically boosted the sales of this product because they needed the boxes to connect all those legacy phones. On the other hand, apparently the healthcare sector in the US, that requirement was recently lifted. And so the sales in China actually went down. On the other hand, in the US, we saw a boost in sales because apparently in the healthcare sector, they started practicing putting kind of disposable phones in some of the departments to prevent cross-contamination. And obviously because the analog phones are much cheaper, that's what they went for. The analog phone would cost like $5 versus the voice over IP fancy phone would cost something like $50. So the combination of the two drove the fact that because the manufacturing facility was located in Shenzhen, China, most of the sales happen in the US, that shipping ate into the margins of profits. So basically what we needed to do was to move manufacturing away from Shenzhen over to the Texas facilities of Cisco and start manufacturing it in Texas. It was a huge project, like multiple years to get back to profitability, but basically once that was done, the product became a cash cow again. So we did lots of forecasting, documentation, pitched it, drove the product. It was pretty cool. Then I came to Zeus. Zeus is a dating app. It's somewhere between like eHarmony and Match.com and Tinder. Now, I always wanted to try software. I didn't attend any product school events back then. I just learned that product school existed only for 4 years. That happened right before that. And so I needed to experience it myself. So I switched to Zeus, and my first assignment was to work on roundification. Back then, all the giants, Facebook, Google, transitioned to this interesting trend when they took square pictures of the users and made them round. So my job was to identify all the places where the users appeared with square pictures. The PRD was like, take the square picture, make it round, preserving the aspect ratio. Ran an A/B test, saw a bit of an increase in app usage, and that's about it. Rolled it on iOS, on Android, on web, done. Now, I kind of oversimplified the things a little bit, but we actually did a bunch of pretty complicated projects. We worked on fraud prevention. I had the opportunity to work on the actual matching algorithm. I worked on advertisement insertion. But frankly, sometime after I quit Cisco, I had this feeling of being underwhelmed by the significance and importance of the things I worked on. Right. So going from moving manufacturing between continents, I was moving from squares to circles. But again, it's super subjective. Obviously, there is a lot of important work in software. Take all the medical software, and let's talk about a different example at Pandora. So currently, I'm working on algorithms for content insertion. So Pandora is, as you might know, a musical app, it's a personalized radio, right? It is playing music that is tailored to your specific interests. So it doesn't have only music. It has a bunch of other pieces of content. For example, comedy, podcasts, artist messages, audio commercials. And we need to identify how to best balance the music versus the other pieces of content. So some things we do is trying to answer those questions, like when is the best moment to interrupt you? Right? Some people choose those apps to just listen to the music. Some people want to be informed about other stuff, so maybe they do want to be interrupted. And maybe when they skip a song a bunch of times, that would not be the ideal place to play a commercial, but maybe some other content would be best. So what is the optimal content to insert? How long should the interruption be? Maybe some people would love to listen to a 30 minutes podcast, while some others just want to listen to their music all the time. How frequent the interruptions should be, how many different types of content we want to mix in one session, and so on. So pretty interesting problems in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Pretty cool stuff that we do there. And going back to, for example, managing different stakeholders, it is pretty complicated. So in terms of internal stakeholders, so let's just look at ads, right, at commercials. So in terms of internal stakeholders, we have to work with sales team, financials team, strategy team to understand how many ads can we push in. Internal tools for ads booking, trafficking, mediation between the different types of ads. So that would involve a lot of work with other PMs that are responsible for all those tools. On the external side, we work with some Google tools and Facebook tools for ad insertion. So we need to talk with those guys a lot. We work with hardware vendors. Pandora is on Roku, Sonos, Chromecast, Google Home, Amazon Echo, whatnot. So lots of vendors that you also need to kind of manage relationships with. And you need to work with advertisers themselves. So that's kind of an example to say that it's not all as oversimplified as here, but more often than not, it would involve less outbound work than hardware. All right, so after we saw a few of those examples, I think we can talk about the interesting piece, how to get the job. Yes?
In the last previous slide, you had the mediation. What's that?
Ads mediation. Yeah, so the question is, what is ads mediation? Basically, a mechanism to choose one ad over the other, or one type of the ad over the other, based on a bunch of parameters. Maybe
so it's more organizational specific to what you have aligned that, because you had that as a separate category there under the internal factors.
it might be like a separate domain by itself for ads.
Okay.
Like we can talk on a different maybe session, the whole session about ads and. Yeah, it's just another thing to keep in mind and manage. And sometimes there would be a designated PM to manage just that. Okay, so how to get the job? So remember that slide? Let's try to focus on the hardware piece. Right, so long product life cycle, no option for A/B testing, heavy vendor management, financial responsibilities. All that leads me to believe that if you have no coding background, no A/B testing experience, but you somehow manage third parties and external vendors and have some experience with inventory forecasting or financials, then hardware might be an easier match for you, at least to get the interview. And if that actually excited you, then it might as well be your product of choice. On the other hand, if you just can't stop thinking about how to optimize that app that you use every time, right? You open your Facebook Messenger and you think, oh, how did they put this video ad there? Right? Or if you mostly work with engineering or QA, or if you ever ran an experiment or played with Google Analytics, software might be a slightly better match for you. Not to say that you can't work on hardware and vice versa, right? But again, in terms of getting an interview, that might be an easier path. All right, how to excel in your job. So again, we talked about those, but those are kind of universal. And again, it all comes down to whether or not you can educate yourself about your domain, about your product. Can you read that article through to the end about that hardware box and not fall asleep? If so, then hardware might be a good match. Same for software. All right. Yeah, I think one of the questions that I got a lot was it easy to switch? So I put this little diagram here. So once you're a PM, right, a software PM or a hardware PM, switching within that domain is pretty easy. Switching from hardware to software or vice versa, kind of medium. Not as easy, not super hard. The good news is it's probably easier than switching from not being a PM to a PM. And deliberately I didn't put hard here, just a little harder than this. And that's about it. So obviously having some experience and some background with PM work would help in an interview. And another thing that would help is this, Decode and Conquer. This book is responsible for me getting the first software PM interview. Fantastic book. I'm not affiliated with the author, besides the fact that we both graduated the same school. But a really practical, down-to-earth book with examples for how to pass an interview and how to do your PM job really well. That is it. Questions? Yes?
How much do you feel that what you did interviewing correlates to your day-to-day?
How much my interview was related to what I'm actually doing?
The book, Decode and Conquer, was helpful to help you get that interview.
Yeah. The book is a kind of a good blend of both the skills you need for the interview and for the actual job. It's a totally different story of what they ask you in the interview and what you will be doing in your job. Those are basically unrelated. More or less the same as the responsibilities from LinkedIn jobs. Two different things. The book would help you in both. Yeah, somebody had a question over there.
In the software and the PM, kind of in LinkedIn, a lot of advertisements regarding like a UX and UI designers who need to work with them. I didn't see you mention that at all over here.
Again, in the software,
PM, probably.
yeah, you would work a lot with UX.
You have to work with UX and UI designers a lot.
Sure.
Because you're working on the software piece of it.
Right. Yep, that definitely adds to the number of stakeholders that you work with. Still doesn't compare with the number of stakeholders in a hardware world.
Right.
You would still work with UX.
Do you need to have like a user research background to get into the software product?
Definitely helps. Yeah, so going back to my claim that engineering background is probably the worst one to have, I saw people from user experience, user research, marketing, accounting, leading much more user-centric conversations, much better conversations than PMs that come with a technical background. Conversations that were more focused on the revenue piece of the ROI formula rather than on the investment piece, right? Investment should basically be driven by engineering, not so much by the product manager. Yeah, you had a question?
So based on your experience within this profession or as a product manager or product leader, based on your previous hardware and software experience, what were at least top 3 challenges within that profession? That's number one. And the other thing, as an individual who might be seeking for an interview.
Wait. Let's go for the challenges first, because I'll need to list 3.
Yeah, that would be good.
The challenges list 3 things every time. So the challenges for software or for the hardware?
So,
Wait, 3 for each?
yeah, I think you might
Oh.
have found you would have found some common challenges that you found that, okay, this was a challenge, but it was helpful for you to do the next job.
Right, right. Yeah, going back to this, I think those 3 would be your main challenges. Those are the features that you would want to have, and you would be challenged on each one of those every day. You need to be able to come up with new ideas, not just ideas about the product, but about the overall roadmap and how to break that roadmap down to milestones. Have the vision.
That's where the major struggle is, right? In terms of how we interpret an idea. We talk about different ideas, we talk about problems, which eventually turns out to be a feature when that product exists.
Right, right.
And then you have the roadmaps, which is again a bigger monster if it's understood properly. If it's not, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So it's kind of easy to fall back to this mode of, oh, this is the product that I need to manage. I need to talk to this guy and to this guy and to get it executed there and to get some development resources. It's harder to step back or to take the time to step back and to think holistically about the roadmap and the vision and what you want to do with this product 5 years, 10 years forward. Ability to influence others. That's some people just have it naturally, and some people just need to develop it. And it's definitely possible to develop, and that is a challenge. That sometimes is just hard. Drive and bias for action, you would sit on a meeting and you would say, oh yeah, I'll chat to that QE manager tomorrow and we'll figure it out. But then when you leave that meeting, you actually need to go and chat to that person. And it's sometimes, although it might sound trivial, it's sometimes not that easy. Those challenges exist in every position, hardware, software, PM. Let's let somebody else ask something, and then we go back to you. Yeah.
All right, can we talk a little bit about the difference in interview questions or what the interview structures are?
Differences in interview questions?
Yeah, and just what, I guess,
Yeah. I remember for a Cisco interview, it was kind of a case, like a consulting case, when we went through a new product introduction, and basically it required you to have a good framework for that particular question or domain of new product introductions. We talked through that. It wasn't hugely analytical, but it definitely didn't talk about how you manage vendors or anything like that. That you would learn in the job. Basically, it was mostly, from what I also heard from my friends, it would usually be some kind of a case that would allow you to showcase your ability to think in a structured manner and take into account different stakeholders. For software, it was, from my personal experience, more analytical, more talking about smaller details. How did you run that A/B test? How would you run an A/B test? How would you segment the users if you have a bug? How would you go about identifying where the bug is? That kind of stuff. Yes?
Earlier you were talking about how hardware lifecycle was much longer, and so it's a little bit more difficult to iterate and so forth. But I was a little curious about the overall developmental framework for, say, software versus hardware, where, typically we think of hardware as waterfall, but would you say that, perhaps in your own personal experience, you saw that there was an effort to introduce agile methodology into hardware development so that you can, I suppose it could be done different ways, and I'd love to hear more from you. But just as an example, maybe developing certain assets that could be leveraged, or platforms and things like that that can be used so that, say, for instance, that box that you were working on, whether there were certain boards that could be used across
Sure.
products and so forth.
Yeah, got it. So the question is, how does Agile integrate with hardware world, right? And how does that compare to the kind of more traditional waterfall model? Surprisingly, we did work with Agile at Cisco, and I found it to be ridiculous because the hardware product is there and you put a bunch of chips there and you ship it, and if there is a problem, you recall the product, you fix it, and you ship back. You can't really iterate in weekly releases of the product, right? So they did try to work in Agile simply in terms of planning ahead, planning their software or hardware work ahead, but the actual released product was released after the whole cycle was done, and the next version of it was a natural waterfall interaction. So they try to be agile, maybe to kind of stay trendy and attract talent by putting agile development experience in their job postings. That's what I can say about that. Because it would, until we find a way how to change hardware remotely in weekly cycles, it won't be agile.
One quick question. So regarding like machine learning and AI and all that, right? So how good a PM has to be towards like data analytics in that field? Like
Yeah,
big data
yeah.
and all of that.
Yeah, how good should a PM be with machine learning and artificial intelligence and all those buzzwords in his work? I think it's not 100% necessary to be like super professional with those. I do find it useful to understand the terminology. I actually took this cool online course on Coursera called Machine Learning, I think, which actually gives you some opportunity to actually code a little bit, but you don't really have to. You can find a bunch of homeworks on the internet if you just need to submit that. But it does educate you a lot about those terms. And nowadays, when I interview scientists for our group, I can actually pretend like I understand what they're saying.